Hey everyone, welcome to On Tap. I'm Chris, and in keeping with our theme of England from the last episode, today we'll be talking about a number of English breweries and labels, specifically Newcastle, Boddingtons, Old Speckled Hen, and Robinsons. And I'm picking these because brown ale and bitters specifically are very characteristically English styles of beer. So, to the episode. Newcastle Brown Ale is by far the most recent of the companies profiled in this episode. It was started by Lieutenant Colonel James Porter, who came from a family of brewers and of course grew up in the northeast of England. Now, Mr. Porter, after serving in the First World War, came home and with the help of a chemist eventually developed the recipe for what would become Newcastle Brown Ale, and they got everything running by 1927. Now, as befitting beer from northeast England, the beer is heavily associated with the region and its connection to heavy industry, including coal, which is to say Newcastle Brown Ale has traditionally been seen very much as a working man's beer. The logo is a blue star with a bridge overlaid on it, so the 5 points of the star represent the 5 founding breweries of Newcastle, while the blue represents the blue of the River Tyne, which flows through the heart of the city. Newcastle Brown Ale is found far and wide and is one of the UK's most produced bottled beer. In the early 2010s, the brewery was producing just under 400,000 barrels UK, though the company is a Heineken subsidiary. Over half of the beer produced by Newcastle is actually exported to the United States, and more Americans at this point drink Newcastle than people in the UK. And this might have to do with the fact that between 2000 and 2010, amount of beer exported to the US more than doubled. And then a strange thing happened. So once Heineken realized that more Americans were actually drinking Newcastle than Brits, in 2019, they sort of decided to take one of their other subsidiaries, Lagunitas, and then have them brew a different style of Newcastle for Americans. They actually changed the recipe to make the beer less malty and more hoppy to suit American tastes, at least the beer that's being exported to the United States. The UK Newcastle has stayed the same, which is to say that American Newcastle Brown Ale is not in fact Newcastle Brown Ale, but rather an imposter, or imposta, as Werner Herzog would say.
Internet is full of imposters.
But I mean, I'm sure it's fine, really. Like, what could possibly go wrong?
Just stop. Just stop it. No, just stop it.
Damn it. Boddingtons is from Manchester, England, my Nana and Granddad's hometown, and actually has a major regional footprint in the northwest of England. Now, the Boddingtons Brewery was created in 1813 when a certain Mr. Henry Boddington came along and joined a currently running operation, the Strangeways Brewery, yes, apparently it was called that had been around since 1778. And then Mr. Boddington eventually made partner and then named the brewery after himself, as he was the one ponying up the cash. But it seems that he knew what he was doing, along with his son and heir, as between about 1850 and 1900, Boddingtons became not only a public company, and not only the largest beer producer in the greater Manchester area, but also the largest brewery in all of northern England. And its fortunes continued to improve even well into the 1990s, where the company was producing over 850,000 barrels every year. Boddington's beer also became very much associated with the city of Manchester, kind of like Newcastle Brown Ale was with Newcastle. Unfortunately, in 2000, when AB InBev, the massive beer mega conglomerate, acquired Boddingtons, the amount of Boddingtons produced really decreased dramatically, and these days only about 150,000 barrels of Boddington is produced. The label makes basically 2 versions of the same beer. It's sort of best known for the Boddingtons Bitter. Now, this exists as Boddington's Draught Bitter, which I think you can only drink on tap in the UK, in pubs, restaurants, and hotels in the UK, and then also Boddington's Pub Ale, which you can get in a can, and it's really the only one available if you live sort of outside of the United Kingdom. But also, fun fact, Boddington's was actually one of the first companies to adopt the use of a widget in its cans, which allowed for the pouring of a nice creamy head when you poured the beer out of a can into a glass. See, when I was a young econ student in undergrad, I was always told that a widget was just sort of a term for a vague mechanical device. It's kind of a placeholder, or like a theoretical concept, if you will. But after all of this time, the answer was right in front of us. A widget is apparently the thing in a beer can which allows a nice creamy head to form when you pour the beer out of the can into a glass. Who knew? Well, actually a widget still means a theoretical mechanical device that you use in an academic setting, but apparently whoever came up with this device for the beer can just couldn't come up with a better name for the item. Now, Old Speckled Hen is not actually the name of a brewery, rather it is the name of the star beer of the Moorland Brewery, which is based in Suffolk, England, and since 2000 has been a subsidiary of Green King, which is a major sort of UK pub and restaurant retailer. Now, while Old Speckled Hen is by far and away the most popular of the Moorland beers, let's do some very quick history. So, the Moorland Brewery has been around for a while. It was started in 1711 by John Moorland, who was actually a farmer. The company expanded from just a local operation to then a regional and then finally national brewery over the course of the 1700s 1918 and 1900s, as so many other breweries have done. Now, like many other breweries in the UK, the Moorland Brewery did not just make beer, it also built pubs, with peak construction taking place in the 1930s. Now, I've talked about this a little bit in other videos, but the notion of breweries managing and in many cases owning pubs, as well as usually restaurants and hotels, is a very characteristic aspect of sort of beer culture in the UK, and it's almost entirely unknown in countries like the United States. And I might talk about this in a history video kind of later on, but where this kind of comes from is the idea of beer and hospitality sort of evolving together in England and the British Isles more generally as far back as the Middle Ages. While the Moorland Brewery's been around since the early 1700s, Old Speckled Hen itself is actually a pretty new beer. It was only created in 1979. Nonetheless, the hen, as it's often known, is found in more than 40 countries worldwide, and I've definitely found it in cities like New York and LA. Apparently it's also very popular in Singapore of all places, but I guess they're still part of the Commonwealth. Okay, so Old Speckled Hen is popular, but why am I not profiling Moorland? Well, let's put it this way. If you type Moorland Brewery into Google, you are presented with a website for Old Speckled Hen, so that's what we're going with. Robinson's, like Boddingtons, is another brewery based in the greater Manchester area, specifically in the area of Stockport. So the Robinson's brewery kind of got started in the 1830s, 1838, when Mr. William Robinson bought up the Unicorn Inn, and then in 1849 finally decided he'd try his hand at brewing some beer. Him and then the next generation of Robinsons expanded operations, like so many other companies, buying up a number of public houses in the process. And we would know this today as pubs. So yes, if you didn't know, a pub is just short for a public house. And if you did already know that, you know what? Give yourself a pat on the back. Currently today, the Robinson Brewery is actually still family run. The fifth and sixth generation of Robinsons manage operations, and they brew beer out of the Unicorn Brewery, named of course after the original Unicorn Inn from the 1830s. The company, over the course of the 20th century and 21st century, did buy up a number of smaller breweries, and also, of course, like so many other British breweries, owns over 300 different pubs. In this case, they're mostly located throughout sort of northwestern England and northern Wales. But you know what Robinsons does have? Trooper, premium British beer. This beer was actually created from a recipe developed by who other than Bruce Dickinson. And if you don't know who Bruce Dickinson is, he's the lead singer for the British heavy metal rock band Iron Maiden. And he's also a pretty interesting guy. He's done a lot of different things outside of just play heavy metal rock music, well, and incidentally, brew beer. And yeah, just if you're wondering, he did make this beer in conjunction with Robinsons. They were working together. It's not like he did a totally separate thing. They're sort of on the same team with this one. So the beer was named the Trooper in honor of the Iron Maiden song, The Trooper, which is about the famous, or should I say maybe infamous, or perhaps ill-fated Charge of the Light Brigade. And then the album, also called The Trooper, features arguably the most recognizable Iron Maiden artwork of all time. A skeletal British redcoat carrying a saber and a tattered Union Jack. That's pretty metal. Newcastle Brown Ale. Now, if you couldn't guess from the name, this brown ale, at least the UK version of it, is going to be sort of a very sweet and kind of nutty beer. Some people have almost described it as like a liquid version of a nutty chocolate bar. But we are trying the American version, which is going to be far less sweet and more hoppy. Sounds like at some point we're going to need to do a Newcastle Brown Ale versus Newcastle Brown Ale taste test, just so no one's confused. Boddington's Pub Ale. This is the export version of the sort of characteristic Boddington's UK-based draught bitter. And this beer is going to have sort of a golden color and a rich, smooth, kind of malty flavor to it, along with a nice creamy head. Old Speckled Hen, the flagship beer of the Moorland Brewery. This is a premium bitter, and what makes it a premium bitter is the fact that it's got an ABV of around 5%, which is over that of sort of regular bitters, best bitters, keeping in mind that bitters were traditionally weaker beers. The Old Speckled Hen is going to have some sort of malty, toffee, biscuity flavors, and it's going to be nice and smooth with some fruity undertones. Trooper, this is also a premium bitter. It's going to be deep golden in color, and should also have some lemon flavor in it, interestingly. But aside from the lemon, it should also have those sort of characteristic sweet and bitter notes one would associate with an English bitter.